Chipotle Mexican Grill Inc. is one of the most dominant and disruptive forces in the modern food industry. With over 3,500 locations and $10 billion in annual revenue, it created and now defines the entire fast casual category. The brand is synonymous with food with integrity, a philosophy built on fresh, non-GMO, and sustainably sourced ingredients. However, the company's history is a story of a central near-fatal conflict, a struggle between its slow food ideals and the brutal logistical realities of fast food scale. This conflict would lead to a period of massive success, a catastrophic public health crisis that destroyed 50% of its value, and a complete corporate reinvention from fine dining chef to burrito king. The company was founded in 1993 by Steve Ells, a classically trained chef. Ells was not a fast food entrepreneur. He was a graduate of the prestigious Culinary Institute of America in New York. After culinary school, he worked as a line cook at Stars, a high-end classic European restaurant in San Francisco. While living in San Francisco's Mission District, Ells became fascinated by the local taquerias. He was not drawn to the authenticity of the food, but to the efficiency of the business model. He observed that these small, independent shops were serving hundreds of customers a day with a very simple, high-quality and high-profit system. They used fresh grilled meats, simple ingredients, and a production line assembly model where customers would walk down the line, choosing their ingredients. Ells saw a massive market opportunity. He believed he could apply this taqueria model to a different, more Americanized palate, but with a critical difference. He would use his fine dining culinary background to elevate the ingredients. His idea was simple: to prove that fast food did not have to mean bad food. In 1993, Ells returned to his home state of Colorado. He approached his father, a pharmaceutical executive, and secured an $85,000 loan. This initial capital was used to open the very first Chipotle Mexican Grill on July 13, 1993, in a former Dolly Madison ice cream shop near the University of Denver. The original concept was not to build an empire. Ells's initial business plan was to use the fast casual burrito shop as a cash cow to fund his real dream, opening a high-end fine dining restaurant. He calculated that he needed to sell 107 burritos per day to break even. In the first month, the small shop was selling over 1,000 burritos a day. The model was an immediate explosive success. Ells had tapped into a completely unmet demand. Customers were desperate for an alternative to the legacy fast food of McDonald's and Taco Bell. They wanted food that was fast but also fresh, customizable, and perceived as higher quality. Ells's fine dining background was the key differentiator. He did not use frozen, pre-cooked meat patties or processed cheese. He used fresh, whole muscle pork shoulder, marinated and slow-cooked for hours, to create his signature carnitas. He used whole kernel corn, fresh cilantro, and real lime juice. This was the birth of his food with integrity philosophy. This philosophy was not just a marketing slogan, it was an operational model. By focusing on a small, simple menu with a limited number of high-quality interchangeable ingredients, Ells created a system that was incredibly efficient. This assembly line model, which relied on manual skilled labor, was the core of the business. It allowed for massive customization, but it was also a central operational vulnerability that would have consequences decades later. The McDonald's partnership. The early growth was rapid. The profits from the first store were immediately reinvested to open a second. Ells quickly abandoned his fine dining dream, realizing that Chipotle was the business. By 1998, just 5 years after its founding, Steve Ells had grown his company from a single shop to 16 high-volume locations in the Denver area. He had proven the fast casual concept, but he had also hit a wall. He was now competing with massive entrenched fast food chains. He was running 16 restaurants, but he lacked the scale and, most importantly, the capital to grow into a national brand. He needed a partner with a deep understanding of real estate, global supply chains, and franchising. In 1998, he found that partner, and it was the one company that represented everything he had defined his brand against: McDonald's Corporation. By 1998, Steve Ells had proven his concept. His 16 locations in Denver were a massive success, demonstrating that consumers were willing to pay a premium price for fast food made with fresh, high-quality ingredients. The food with integrity philosophy, which relied on slow-cooked carnitas and fresh, hand-prepped cilantro lime rice, was the brand's core differentiator. This model, where burritos accounted for 80% of revenue, was highly profitable at a local level. But Ells was now facing a significant barrier to entry. He was attempting to build a national restaurant chain, an industry that requires hundreds of millions of dollars in capital for real estate and supply chain logistics. His $85,000 loan was long gone, and the company's profits, while strong, were not enough to fund a national war against the fast food giants. In 1998, Ells made a decision that would define the company's future. He accepted a minority investment from McDonald's Corporation. This was a deal with the devil in the eyes of many. Chipotle was, by its very definition, the anti-McDonald's. It was a brand built on rejecting the very frozen, processed fast food model that McDonald's had perfected. The reason for this partnership was a pragmatic exchange of needs. Chipotle needed two things that only a company like McDonald's had: massive capital and world-class operational expertise. McDonald's, in turn, was facing its own crisis in the late 1990s. Its brand was seen as stale, and it was losing ground to fast casual competitors. McDonald's saw Chipotle as its growth engine, a way to buy into the very trend that was threatening its business. The effectiveness of this partnership was immediate and transformative. McDonald's, which began as a minority investor, eventually poured an estimated $360 million into the burrito chain, becoming its majority shareholder. This cash infusion was the rocket fuel for Chipotle's national expansion, but the capital was only half of the equation. The true value of the partnership was the operational and logistical expertise. Steve Ells, the fine dining chef, knew how to braise pork. He did not know how to build a national supply chain capable of delivering millions of fresh, non-GMO avocados to hundreds of stores across the country. McDonald's did. McDonald's operational teams, the best in the world, taught Chipotle how to scale. They provided their expertise in real estate, site selection, and, most importantly, supply chain logistics. This partnership, however, was also the source of the company's first major internal cultural conflict. A clash of civilizations began. The McDonald's executives, obsessed with efficiency and standardization, were horrified by Ells's model. They saw his food with integrity philosophy not as an asset, but as an expensive, inefficient bottleneck. They pressured Ells to make fast food changes. Why not use frozen, pre-cooked meat? Why not franchise the brand rapidly to grow faster? Why not add drive-thrus? This conflict defined the 8-year partnership. Ells, to his credit, stubbornly resisted. He fought to protect his core fresh food model. He did, however, make one crucial concession to the McDonald's model: a limited franchise system. While he insisted on keeping the vast majority of stores corporate-owned to maintain 100% control over food quality, he did allow a small number of franchises to be opened. This was a direct influence of the McDonald's growth mindset. The partnership was a massive financial success. With McDonald's' $360 million in capital and its operational guidance, Chipotle exploded across the country. The company grew from 16 stores in 1998 to over 500 stores by 2006. This 20 to 30% annual growth, as the data indicates, was one of the fastest expansions in restaurant history. But by 2005, the cultural clash had become too great. Chipotle's food with integrity message was in direct public conflict with McDonald's fast food image. McDonald's, under new leadership, also decided to refocus on its core burger business. The parent company decided to divest. In 2006, McDonald's spun off Chipotle in one of the most successful initial public offerings of the decade. The stock was offered at $22 a share. On its very first day of trading, it exploded, doubling in value to $44 a share. This IPO was the graduation day for the fast casual movement. It proved definitively that the public was willing to pay a premium for food with integrity. The $360 million investment from McDonald's had been a massive success for both parties. McDonald's had turned its $360 million into a multi-billion-dollar windfall, and Steve Ells had successfully used McDonald's to get exactly what he needed, capital and scale, without ever compromising on his core fresh food product. The formation of the brand was now complete. Chipotle was a public company, free from its corporate parent. It was a fast casual premium brand, built on a unique hybrid model, the fine dining ingredient philosophy of Steve Ells, the production line efficiency of the San Francisco taquerias, and the global scale and logistical power of McDonald's. It was this powerful but contradictory combination that would rocket the company to $758 a share and lead it directly to the catastrophic health crisis that would almost destroy it. The collapse of food with integrity. By 2013, Chipotle, under the leadership of its founder, Steve Ells, was at the absolute peak of its cultural and financial power. The 2006 IPO was a distant memory, and the company's stock was a Wall Street phenomenon, driven by a 20 to 30% annual growth rate. The food with integrity philosophy had proven to be the most successful marketing strategy of the decade, creating a new fast casual category and capturing a generation of consumers who were rejecting traditional fast food. But this success created a new complex problem. The company was no longer an underdog burrito shop. It was a multi-billion-dollar corporation. And its food with integrity message, while powerful, was difficult to communicate. It was an abstract agricultural concept about sustainably raised beef and non-GMO sourcing. This was a message that was hard to fit into a 30-second TV ad. This challenge led to the company's first major non-food diversification. This was not a pivot to create new revenue. It was a pivot to storytelling. The reason for this was to find a new, more engaging way to tell its complex food with integrity story to a new generation of digital native consumers. The company needed to bypass traditional advertising and create cultural content that consumers would choose to watch. This strategy culminated in the August 2013 launch of The Scarecrow. This was not a commercial. It was a high-art animated short film and an accompanying iOS/Android mobile game. This was one of the first and most ambitious branded content campaigns ever launched, and it represented a massive $20 million plus campaign investment. The film itself was a masterpiece of dark brand storytelling. It was a 3-minute dystopian Willy Wonka-style film set to a haunting cover of Pure Imagination, sung by Fiona Apple. The film, created by the prestigious Moonbot Studios, depicted a sad, lonely scarecrow working for Crow Foods, Inc. A massive industrial food conglomerate. The Crow Foods factory was a dark, oppressive place where cows were injected with chemicals in red-lit boxes and chickens were force-fed in tiny cages. The film's slogan was, "Cultivate a better world." This was a direct, unambiguous, multi-million-dollar attack ad on the entire fast food industry. Crow Foods was a clear stand-in for McDonald's, Taco Bell, and the industrial food system that Chipotle was defining itself against. The film was designed to drive downloads for the second part of the campaign, the Scarecrow mobile game. This game was a simple, endless runner-style game where the player's goal was to rescue animals from the Crow Foods factory and bring them to Chipotle's fresh, sustainable, local farm. The game was not a cheap gimmick. It was a high-quality, beautifully designed app, and it had a brilliant incentive. If a player successfully completed the game, they were rewarded with a voucher for a free burrito. The effectiveness of this pivot into gaming was staggering. The film went viral, generating, as the data indicates, 1.5 million views. In its first few days, the game was a massive hit, achieving 500,000 downloads in its first week. This was a revolutionary marketing flywheel. The emotional film drove downloads of the interactive game, which in turn drove actual foot traffic into the stores. This was a multifaceted success. First, it was a brand-building masterpiece. It perfectly communicated the complex food with integrity message. In a simple, emotional, and non-preachy way, it made Chipotle the hero of the story. Second, it was a data capture tool. It was one of the first gamified loyalty programs, capturing 500,000 of its most engaged users on a digital platform. Third, it was a direct driver of sales, turning app downloads into in-store redemptions. This 2013 pivot was a massive success. It won numerous advertising awards and was hailed as the future of marketing. It cemented Chipotle's holier-than-thou brand identity. It was also, in hindsight, the absolute peak of the company's hubris. This campaign, which so perfectly articulated the fresh and sustainable model, was launched just 2 years before that very same model would lead to the catastrophic 2015 E. coli crisis. The Scarecrow campaign had created a brand halo so bright that the company's subsequent failure would seem even more hypocritical and damaging. The 2006 initial public offering of Chipotle was a resounding success. Freed from McDonald's Corporation, Steve Ells was now in complete control, and he took his food with integrity philosophy to the extreme. For the next decade, Chipotle was the undisputed king of the new fast casual market it had created. The company was a cultural and financial phenomenon. Its stock was one of the hottest on Wall Street, soaring from its $22 initial public offering price to a peak of $758 per share in August 2015. The brand was seen as invincible. It had successfully branded itself as the anti-McDonald's, a virtuous company built on fresh, local, non-GMO, and sustainable ingredients. But this very philosophy, the food with integrity model, was a ticking time bomb. It was a brilliant marketing strategy, but it was a logistical and operational nightmare. The entire fast food model, perfected by companies like McDonald's and Taco Bell, was built on eliminating risk. It used centralized, frozen, sterile, and fully controlled supply chains. The food was engineered for safety and consistency. Chipotle's model was the exact opposite. It was a decentralized network of hundreds of small local and independent farms. Its entire brand promise was fresh, which meant a constant stream of raw, uncooked produce, tomatoes, cilantro, lettuce, entering its kitchens. This fresh produce is a primary vector for foodborne pathogens like E. coli and Norovirus. Furthermore, the company's in-store manual preparation, which involved employees hand-chopping vegetables and mixing salsas, introduced hundreds of new points of human contact, dramatically increasing the risk of cross-contamination. This high-risk, low-control model was a structural flaw, and in 2015 the system collapsed. The food with integrity philosophy was on a direct collision course with food with safety, and the results were catastrophic. The crisis did not happen all at once. It was a rolling disaster that proved the company's problems were not a one-off accident, but a deep systemic failure of its core model. In July 2015, an E. coli 0157:H7 outbreak was linked to a single Chipotle restaurant in Seattle. In August, a massive norovirus outbreak in Simi Valley, California, sickened over 200 people. These were just tremors. The main big one hit in October 2015. A severe multi-state outbreak of E. coli 026 was identified, starting in Oregon and Washington. This was not a localized problem. It was a national one. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the FDA were activated. The outbreak spread, eventually hitting 22 states and sickening over 50 people with a severe strain of E. coli that required hospitalization. Then, just as the company was trying to manage the E. coli crisis, a second separate wave hit. In December 2015, a massive norovirus outbreak, the stomach flu, exploded from a single Chipotle in Boston, Massachusetts. Over 140 students at Boston College were sickened. This was a different pathogen, proving the problem was not a single bad batch of steak. The problem was systemic and included poor employee hygiene protocols. This was followed by a salmonella outbreak in Minnesota. In total, over 500 people were officially sickened in less than 6 months. The financial and legal fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Customers were terrified. The brand that was built on trust and integrity was now the face of a national public health crisis. Sales collapsed. The company's revenue, which had been a record $4.5 billion in 2015, plummeted by 30% to $3.9 billion in 2016. It was the first sales decline in the company's entire history. The stock, a Wall Street darling that had peaked at $758 per share, went into freefall. As the outbreaks continued and the company's response seemed slow and inadequate, investors and the public lost faith. The stock began a long, brutal slide, eventually bottoming out below $300. Over 50% of the company's value, billions of dollars, was wiped out. The legal pressure was immense. The company was hit with over 100 lawsuits from victims. The U.S. Department of Justice launched a criminal investigation into the company's food safety practices, citing it for violating the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. This criminal probe would hang over the company for years, finally culminating in 2020 with a massive $25 million fine, the largest food safety fine in U.S. history, to resolve the charges. This external crisis was a gift to its competitors. As terrified customers fled Chipotle, they went directly to its rivals. Taco Bell, Qdoba, and Moe's Southwest Grill all saw a corresponding 5 to 10% increase in their market share. The brand moat that Steve Ells had built over 20 years was gone. The 2015 to 2017 food safety crisis was the external event that shattered Chipotle's financial performance. The 30% revenue collapse in 2016 and the 50% stock price implosion were the direct results of E. coli, Norovirus, and Salmonella outbreaks. But these external challenges were not the cause of the company's problems. They were the symptom. The true crisis was internal. The outbreaks had merely exposed the deep operational flaws in the leadership crisis that had been building for years under founder and CEO Steve Ells. While Chipotle was in a state of public freefall, the company was paralyzed by a massive internal drama and a leadership vacuum. Steve Ells, the visionary chef who had founded the company, was now its greatest liability. Ells was a product man. His food with integrity philosophy, as detailed in the user's outline, was his singular focus. He was obsessed with the story of the food, the non-GMO sourcing, the sustainable farming, the hand-chopped cilantro. But this chef mentality was in direct conflict with the reality of the business he had built. He was no longer running a single Denver taqueria. He was running a 2,000-store multinational corporation. His obsession with integrity and manual preparation had created the very supply chain risk that led to the E. coli outbreaks. He had scaled a local model to a global size, and it had broken. As the crisis unfolded, Ells's leadership style was exposed as a massive failure. He was, by all accounts, an insular and hands-off manager who had prioritized the philosophy of the food over the operations of the business. The company's food safety protocols were decentralized, inconsistent, and, as the 2020 $25 million fine would later prove, criminally negligent. This leadership failure created a cultural crisis. While the public was focused on the E. coli, employees were dealing with a total collapse in morale. The Food with Integrity mission, which had been a powerful recruiting tool, now seemed like a hypocritical joke. This led directly to the 150% spike in employee turnover in 2016. The company was hemorrhaging staff. This massive churn meant that stores were constantly understaffed and operated by poorly trained, unmotivated employees, which only increased the risk of hygiene and food prep failures. This created a death spiral. The food safety crisis caused the turnover, and the turnover made the food safety crisis worse. The company was also suffering from a complete failure of innovation. Ells was so dogmatically focused on the purity of his original simple menu that he had effectively banned new products. For years, the company's menu was stagnant. This lack of innovation made the brand boring and gave competitors a massive opening. While Chipotle was serving the same burrito it had in 1993, rivals were innovating with new proteins, sauces, and, most importantly, queso. The queso story is the perfect example of Ells's failed leadership. For years, customers had begged Chipotle to add queso. A staple of its competitors, Ells had always refused, claiming he could not find a natural recipe that met his integrity standards without using the processed ingredients he despised. When the 2015 crisis hit and sales collapsed, he was finally forced to compromise. In 2017, the company launched its long-awaited all-natural queso. It was a disaster. Customers hated it, describing it as grainy, tasteless, and a failure. This failed launch was a public humiliation, proving that Ells's integrity model was not only unsafe but was now also failing at taste. This combination of a public health crisis, a collapsing stock price, a 150% turnover rate, and a failed product launch created a perfect storm. The company's activist investors, led by Bill Ackman of Pershing Square, had seen enough. Ackman, who had taken a massive 10% stake in the company, began a public campaign to oust Ells. He argued that the company was a brilliant brand that was being catastrophically mismanaged. The internal drama was intense. Ells was the founder, the heart and soul of the brand. but he was now seen as the primary obstacle to its recovery. The company's manual, chef-led food prep model was too slow and too dangerous for a 2,000-store chain. The data was clear. The manual prep, which was core to Ells' philosophy, led to a 20% drop in productivity and throughput compared to its more automated rivals. In November 2017, Steve Ells, under massive pressure from his investors and his own board, surrendered. He announced he would be stepping down as CEO. This was the end of the founder-led era. The man who had built Chipotle on the anti-fast food ideal of food with integrity was ultimately fired because that very ideal was operationally incompatible with food with scale. The 2015 to 2017 crisis was the brutal financial proof that a fine dining philosophy could not run a fast food empire. The company's survival now depended on finding a new leader who was the one thing Steve Ells was not: a fast food operator, the new era of data and the Chipotlane. By the end of 2017, Chipotle was a company in a state of freefall. The 2015 to 2017 food safety crisis, a rolling series of E. coli, Norovirus, and salmonella outbreaks that had sickened over 500 people in 22 states, had done the unthinkable. It had destroyed the brand's single most valuable asset: trust. This was not just a public relations problem, it was a financial catastrophe. The company had lost 30% of its revenue, its stock had collapsed by over 50% from its $758 peak, and a 150% spike in employee turnover had crippled its operations. The food with integrity philosophy, which had been the company's core marketing message, was now an ironic public-facing liability. The company's founder, Steve Ells, who had revolutionized the industry with his fine dining approach to fast food, was now seen as the primary obstacle to its recovery. His chef-led obsession with manual, in-store preparation, and his resistance to menu innovation had been exposed as operationally dangerous and competitively stagnant. Under intense pressure from activist investors like Bill Ackman, Ells announced in November 2017 that he was stepping down as CEO. The founder-led era was over. The company that was built to be the anti-fast food brand was now in a desperate search for a leader who was an expert in the very thing it had always despised: fast food operations. In February 2018, the board announced its choice, a decision that shocked the industry. The new CEO of Chipotle would be Brian Niccol, the outgoing CEO of Taco Bell. This was a profound strategic pivot. Niccol was not a culinary visionary. He was a marketing and operations genius. He was the man responsible for Taco Bell's Doritos Locos Tacos and its masterful pivot into a Gen Z lifestyle brand. The message from the board was clear. The chef era was over and the marketing era was beginning. Niccol was hired to do what Ells could not: make Chipotle's integrity model efficient, safe, and most importantly profitable on a massive scale. When Niccol took over in March 2018, he immediately began a shock and awe campaign to restructure the company from the ground up. He inherited a chef-led culture and set about transforming it into a marketing-led and operations-led corporation. His turnaround plan was built on three core pillars. First, definitively solving the food safety crisis. Second, embracing a digital transformation. And third, ending the brand's product stagnation. Niccol's first and most critical task was to stop the bleeding and regain public trust. He did not just promise safety, he invested in it, green-lighting a $100 million per year budget for food safety, R&D, and operational changes. This was not just PR, It was a fundamental re-engineering of the company's supply chain. Under Els, much of the food prep, like dicing tomatoes and lettuce, was done in the individual restaurant kitchens. This decentralized manual process was a massive source of risk. Nicol's team implemented a new centralized kitchen model. High-risk prep was moved from the 2,000 individual stores to sterile, centralized commissaries, where ingredients could be washed, prepped, and hermetically sealed before being shipped to restaurants. Furthermore, he invested heavily in traceability. The company implemented a blockchain-based tracking system for its agricultural products. This new system allowed the company to trace a single batch of lettuce or steak from the specific farm, to the truck, to the central kitchen, to the restaurant, and finally to the customer's burrito, all in real time. This was a direct response to the 2015 crisis, where the CDC's investigation was frustrated by Chipotle's poor analog records. This new farm-to-fork traceability was a powerful operational fix and an even more powerful marketing message. With the safety problem being addressed, Nicol immediately pivoted to his second and most important campaign, digital transformation under Els. Chipotle was digitally illiterate. It was a walk-in business in a delivery and mobile order world. Nicol, who had built Taco Bell's dominant digital ecosystem, saw this as the company's single greatest opportunity. He immediately authorized a massive investment in a new unified digital platform. The old clumsy app was scrapped. A new streamlined mobile app was launched, fully integrated with a new loyalty program. For the first time, Chipotle began to capture customer data. Under Els, the customer was an anonymous guest. Under Nicol, they became a user, a known entity whose purchasing habits could be tracked, analyzed, and marketed to. This new loyalty program was a massive success, driving a 25% increase in customer retention. The most brilliant innovation of this digital pivot was the Chipotlane. This was Nicol's answer to the drive-thru, a traditional drive-thru, where a customer yells an order into a speaker, was incompatible with Chipotle's complex assembly line customizable menu. The Chipotlane was a digital order-ahead pickup lane. Customers would order and pay on the new mobile app, and their order would be sent to a separate dedicated digital make line in the kitchen. The customer would then simply drive to the window, scan their code, and be handed their bag. This was a masterstroke. It did not compromise the fresh assembly line model, but it dramatically increased throughput, the speed of service. This new digital make line and Chipotlane combination, as the data indicates, was 30% more efficient than the traditional in-store line stores. With this feature saw massive double-digit sales growth. This single innovation was the key to unlocking the company's scale. Finally, Nicol attacked the brand's stagnation problem. He immediately ended Els's no new items philosophy. He understood that a stagnant menu was a death sentence. He launched a rapid, data-driven innovation pipeline, but he did so carefully. He did not flood the menu with cheap items. He introduced premium, LTOS, that reinforced the food with integrity message, such as carne asada and pollo asado. These new high-margin proteins created hype and drove traffic without damaging the brand's quality perception. He also immediately fixed the queso, launching a new, creamier, and far more popular version. Most importantly, he listened to customers and officially added the quesadilla to the menu, but as a digital-only item, a brilliant move that drove app downloads while preventing the complex item from slowing down the main in-store line. This three-pronged strategy led by new CEO Brian Nicol was not just a recovery, it was a total reinvention of the company's operating model. The company was successfully transformed from a chef-led brand into a marketing-led operations-first, Corporation. The Chipotlane, the digital-only pickup lane, became the brand's new post-pandemic engine, perfectly positioned to capture the massive consumer shift toward convenience and off-premise dining. The effectiveness of this turnaround was staggering. The new data-driven loyalty program, an initiative that Steve Ells had long resisted, proved to be the company's most powerful new weapon. The program, which did not exist in 2017, exploded in growth, attracting over 40 million active users by 2025. This was a revolutionary shift. Chipotle was no longer an anonymous restaurant chain. It was now a data-driven tech company that had a direct one-to-one digital relationship with its 40 million most loyal fans. This massive known customer base allowed the company to pivot from expensive mass-market advertising to highly efficient, personalized, digital-first marketing. It used its app to drive engagement, launch new products, and manage customer throughput, driving the 25% increase in customer retention. This new, efficient, and data-rich model fueled the company's next phase: global expansion. Under Ells, international growth had been a slow, neglected afterthought, with only a handful of stores in Canada and Europe. Nickel, who came from the globally dominant Yum, brands immediately identified this as a massive growth opportunity. While the company's 3,500-plus stores remain highly concentrated in just 5 countries, the new strategy was to use the proven U.S. digital-first model as a template for rapid expansion. The European market and Canada became the new focus, with these international markets posting a steady 15% annual growth rate. The company also began to successfully use glocalization for the first time. While the core menu remained, it launched region-specific items, such as the pollo asado in its European markets, to appeal to local palates. This combination of domestic digital dominance and a new international focus completely reversed the company's fortunes. The financial results were undeniable. The company, which had seen its revenue collapse to $3.9 billion in 2016, recovered and then exploded, surpassing $10 billion in annual revenue by 2024. The 2025 third quarter results, showing a robust 13% revenue increase, confirmed that the new model was working. The analysis is clear. Chipotle had successfully completed one of the most difficult turnarounds in corporate history. It had leveraged its near-death 2015 to 2017 crisis as a catalyst for efficiency, as the data notes. It had used the disaster as the political cover to make the hard operational changes, like centralized kitchens and digital-first infrastructure, that its founder, Steve Ells, had long resisted. By 2025, the company was no longer just the fast casual leader. It was a dominant market force. It had captured 15% of the total fast casual market and a staggering 20% of the U.S. market. Most importantly, the operational efficiency of the Chipotlane and the high-margin digital order model had transformed its profitability, leading to massive industry-leading 28% profit margins. The company that had been a broken chef-led brand in 2017 was now, by 2025, a dominant, data-driven, and highly profitable logistics company. Avocado-dyed and esports. This first gaming pivot was a brand-building exercise. It was serious, artistic, and mission-driven. After the 2015 to 2017 crisis, the new leadership under Brian Nicole would resurrect the gaming pivot, but with a completely different reason. It would no longer be about integrity. It would be about Gen Z engagement. The 2015 to 2017 food safety crisis, which saw the company's stock collapse by over 50%, effectively killed the scarecrow era of marketing. The public, having been exposed to E. coli and norovirus outbreaks, was no longer interested in a holier-than-thou animated film about integrity. The brand's message was seen as hypocritical, and the campaign was shelved. When Brian Niccol took over as CEO in 2018, he inherited a brand that was distrusted by its old customers and irrelevant to its new ones. Niccol, who came from Taco Bell, understood the Gen Z demographic. He knew that this new generation was not moved by earnest messages of integrity. They were moved by authentic engagement in the digital spaces where they lived. He immediately identified gaming as the single most important cultural battlefield. But Niccol's reason for this diversification was completely different from Steve Ells'. Ells' 2013 Scarecrow was a top-down, artistic brand-building statement. Niccol's new gaming strategy was a bottom-up commercial to community-building engagement. The reason was to solve the 3% market saturation problem by directly acquiring the ad-resistant Gen Z customer, who, as the data indicates, drives 30% of engagement in this space. This new strategy was not about apps, it was about platforms. The company's new marketing team, led by a new generation of digital native marketers, pivoted aggressively into Twitch. This was not a simple ad buy. Chipotle did not just run 30-second commercials during Twitch streams. Instead, it executed a native integration strategy. This pivot, which accelerated from 2021 to 2025, was about sponsoring the culture itself. The company began by identifying and partnering with the platform's biggest streamers, such as Nick Merckx and Dr. Lupo. It sponsored their streams, giving them a Chipotle celebrity card and having them eat burritos live on air. This culminated in massive platform-wide events. The company launched the Super Ultra Combo Week, a multi-day sponsored event that, as the data shows, involved 89 prominent streamers from the fighting game community. This was a high-cost, high-visibility move. The company also became the official sponsor of major esports tournaments, such as the Evolution Championship Series in 2025, the World Cup of Fighting Games. The effectiveness of this pivot was immense. It was a masterclass in authentic engagement. Instead of being an interruptive ad, Chipotle became a patron of the community. This generated massive goodwill. As the data indicates, these Twitch activations regularly drew 500,000 live viewers and were a key driver of the 15% loyalty increase in the U.S. youth market. This was the Gen Z flywheel in action. The Twitch sponsorship would drive viral conversation. This would then be linked to a digital promotion such as a Chipotle Challenger series, where gamers could win free food. This in turn drove downloads of the Chipotle app, which, as the data shows, now has 40 million users. The company was successfully transferring the rented audience from Twitch to its owned app. This strategy, however, was expensive. The $20 million per campaign cost, as noted in the data, was a massive investment, but it was a data-driven one. The reason was that this was cheaper and more effective than traditional TV advertising. This gaming pivot was the new high-growth customer acquisition model. The company then expanded this strategy to Roblox, another massive Gen Z platform. The 2025 Roblox ad campaign, which achieved 1 billion views, was a similar native pivot. It was not a banner ad, it was an in-game experience, where players' avatars could interact with a virtual Chipotle. The analysis of this second gaming pivot is clear. Unlike the Scarecrow, which was an art project, the Niccol-era gaming strategy is a commercial one. The Scarecrow gave away 500,000 free burritos. The Twitch Roblox pivot created a reason for 500,000 new, young customers to buy burritos and to join the 40 million user digital ecosystem. However, this pivot, while effective, also carries significant fad risk. The 1 billion Roblox views, as the data notes, resulted in short-term sales. This is not a brand-building exercise in the traditional sense. It is a brand relevance exercise. The company is now on a high-speed cultural treadmill. It must constantly find the next big streamer, the next hot platform, to keep its 30% Gen Z engagement. This high-cost, high-risk, short-term engagement model has become a permanent new pillar of its marketing strategy. This gaming pivot, in turn, provided the cultural permission for the company to attempt its next, even more ambitious diversification, the pivot into sustainable fashion. The pivot into gaming, which accelerated under CEO Brian Niccol, was a highly effective top-of-funnel marketing strategy. It was a high-cost, high-impact cultural investment, with $20 million per campaign spends, designed to capture the 30% Gen Z engagement on platforms like Twitch and Roblox. This strategy was a direct response to the brand's post-2015 stagnation, an attempt to make the brand cool and relevant to a new generation. However, this gaming pivot, while generating massive 1 billion plus view counts and a 15% loyalty increase, was also, by its nature, intangible. It was a short-term sales driver. Niccol's team recognized that to truly rebuild the food with integrity brand identity that had been shattered by the 2015 to 2017 E. coli crisis, they needed a second parallel diversification. They needed something tangible. They needed a physical, permanent manifestation of the integrity promise that was not connected to the risks of its food supply chain. This led to the launch of the company's second and arguably more ambitious diversification, the pivot into sustainable fashion and streetwear. This was not a meme pivot like KFC's Crocs or Taco Bell's t-shirts. This was a mission-driven pivot designed to solve two core business problems simultaneously. The first reason for this pivot was a direct response to the 2015 to 2017 health crisis. The original Food with Integrity message, which was based on local and fresh agricultural sourcing, had been proven to be a massive operational and legal risk. The $25 million criminal fine in 2020 was the final nail in that coffin. The company needed to find a new, safer way to communicate its integrity message. The solution was to pivot from agricultural integrity to circular economy integrity. This was a brilliant strategic judo move. The company's core fresh model produced a massive and highly visible amount of food waste. As the user's data indicates, the company was processing over 300 million avocados per year. This created a literal mountain of discarded pits and skins. This waste was not only a high disposal cost for the company, but it was also a public relations liability, a physical symbol of unsustainability in an era of climate-conscious consumers. This pivot was designed to transform that liability into an asset. The second reason for the pivot was to capture a new high-growth market. The sustainable fashion market, as the data shows, was growing at a stable 8% annually. This demographic, young, affluent, and environmentally conscious, was exactly the same Gen Z consumer that the gaming pivot was targeting. By turning its avocado waste into a sustainable product, Chipotle could create a perfect closed-loop marketing story. This strategy was formalized with the launch of the Chipotle Goods platform. This was not a collaboration. It was a permanent, in-house, private label brand. The company deliberately designed the brand's aesthetic to be anti-fast food. The website and products were minimalist, used earth tone colors, and were marketed with language that directly mirrored high-end, Patagonia-style sustainable brands. The flagship products of this new division were the avocado-dyed line. The company invested in a process to take its 300 million avocado pits and boil them down, creating a natural, subtle peach-pink textile dye. This natural dye was then used on a collection of high-quality organic cotton t-shirts, sweatshirts, and tote bags. This was the Scarecrow campaign made real. It was the food with integrity philosophy, perfectly executed in a physical, non-food product. The marketing story was simple, powerful, and most importantly, safe. It was a message of recycling and sustainability that was completely insulated from the operational risks of E. coli or Norovirus. The effectiveness of this pivot was significant, both in branding and in finance. On the branding side, it was a massive success. It rebooted the integrity message for a new generation. It powerfully communicated that Chipotle was an innovative and responsible company, which, as the data indicates, led to a 20% increase in positive brand perception among Gen Z consumers. On the financial side, it was a new high-margin revenue stream. As the data shows, the Chipotle goods line, combined with other merchandise, grew into a $50 million per year ancillary business, selling over 100,000 individual products annually. This, like the gaming pivot, was a crucial risk reduction strategy. It created a new business vertical that was completely insulated from the 3% saturation of the fast casual market and the volatility of its food supply chain. This sustainable fashion pivot was the perfect complement to the gaming pivot. The Twitch and Roblox strategy provided the short-term, high-volume, 1 billion view buzz. The Chipotle goods strategy provided the long-term, high-value, 20% brand perception integrity. One was loud and digital, the other was quiet and physical. However, this pivot, while brilliant, was not without its own new set of risks. As the data analyzes, this is a high-cost strategy. Sourcing organic cotton and using natural avocado dyes is expensive, far more so than simply printing a logo on a cheap mass-produced shirt. This high cost resulted in high prices for the consumer, which limited its global appeal and made it a primarily U.S.-focused luxury good. More importantly, it introduced inventory risk. A fast food company's core competency is managing perishable food inventory. A fashion company's core competency is managing seasonal apparel inventory. Chipotle, by pivoting, was entering a business it had no operational experience in. A failed fashion season is just as operationally damaging as a failed lettuce season. A 10% inventory risk, as the data notes, means that if a hype t-shirt fails to sell, the company is left with a warehouse full of expensive pink t-shirts that must be discounted or destroyed, a move that would itself be unsustainable, and a new PR liability analysis of the two-pronged strategy. The diversification of Chipotle under Brian Nicole, therefore, must be analyzed as two distinct, parallel, and highly sophisticated strategies. They were not separate, random ideas. They were two prongs of a single, unified pincer movement designed to solve the two core problems that caused the 2015 to 2017 crisis: brand stagnation and brand risk. The first prong was the cultural pivot. This was the external-facing, high-cost, high-visibility move into gaming and fashion. This strategy, with its $20 million per campaign cost, was not designed to generate its own revenue, though the $50 million ancillary merchandise business was a significant byproduct. Its primary reason was to rebrand the company's image. It was a direct response to the E. coli crisis, which had made its food with integrity message toxic. This cultural pivot was twofold. The gaming side was a hype strategy, generating billions of viral views, and a 15% loyalty increase by engaging the 30% Gen Z market. The fashion side was an integrity strategy, generating a 20% positive brand perception by creating a new, safe, sustainability narrative that was insulated from food safety risks. This was the sizzle. The second prong was the operational pivot. This was the internal-facing, bottom-of-funnel investment designed to fix the company's efficiency crisis. This pivot, which drove a 25% increase in digital transactions and created 40 million app users, was a diversification into technology, data, and logistics. This was the stake. The true genius of Nicole's turnaround is how these two pivots, which seem unrelated, are actually a single integrated flywheel. The cultural pivot is the engine that gets the 30% of Gen Z customers in the door. It creates the hype. The operational pivot is the transmission. It is the system designed to profitably and efficiently process that new demand. One pivot cannot succeed without the other. The fun marketing of the Twitch sponsorships would be useless if it led to a broken 30-minute in-store line. The efficient Chipotlane would be useless if no new, young customers were being driven to the app. The cultural strategy acquires the customer, and the operational strategy fulfills the order. This two-pronged diversification is a direct, data-driven response to the brand's core weaknesses. The $50 million merchandise business is a high-margin financial shield that directly counters the low-margin, high-risk food business, which is vulnerable to 30% revenue drops from food safety crises. The brand tribe built through gaming is an emotional shield that counters the 5 to 10% market share loss to competitors like Taco Bell and Qdoba. The AI-powered digital make line is an operational shield that counters the 150% employee turnover and the slow chef-led model of the L's era. This entire complex and expensive new model has simply traded one set of risks for another. The old Steve L's era Chipotle was vulnerable to operational risk. The new Brian Niccol era Chipotle has solved that risk with its $100 million a year food safety R&D. But it has exchanged that risk for two new 21st century risks. The first is fad dependency. The brand's cool identity is now tied to the fickle hype cycle of Twitch and Roblox. The $20 million per campaign cost is the annual ante it must now pay to stay relevant. The second is operational overextension. The company, a restaurant, is now in the apparel business, creating a new massive 10% inventory risk. This diversification was a necessary and brilliant move, but it has not solved the brand's problems. It has simply updated them for the 21st century safety must beat philosophy. The history of Chipotle, from its 1993 founding to its 2025 status as a $10 billion a year global corporation, provides a clear and powerful set of lessons. The company's entire journey is a case study in the central high-stakes conflict between a brand philosophy and the operational reality of scale. The lessons learned from its catastrophic failures are the very foundation of its modern, successful, and far more resilient business model. The most important and painful lesson in the company's history was delivered between 2015 and 2017. This was the lesson that food safety is the non-negotiable priority above all else. The company's food with integrity philosophy was, for 2 decades, its greatest asset. It was a brilliant marketing strategy that differentiated the brand from all competitors, but it was also an operational time bomb. The philosophy, as executed by founder Steve Ells, was built on a decentralized, fresh supply chain. It prioritized using local farms and ingredients that were not processed. This was a direct rejection of the centralized, sterilized, safe, but tasteless fast food model of McDonald's. But this model, when scaled to over 2,000 restaurants, created a massive, uncontrollable risk. The company's supply chain was a complex web of small independent farms, making traceability and safety standard enforcement nearly impossible. This decentralized system, combined with a manual, in-store food prep model, created thousands of potential points of failure. In 2015, that system failed. The series of E. coli, Norovirus, and Salmonella outbreaks that sickened over 500 people was not a freak accident. It was a predictable systemic breakdown of the food with integrity model. The company learned in the most brutal way possible that integrity is worthless if the product is unsafe. The consequences of this failure were catastrophic. The 30% collapse in revenue in 2016 and the 50% implosion of the stock price were direct financial lessons. The $25 million criminal fine in 2020 was the legal lesson. The 150% spike in employee turnover was the cultural lesson. And the 5 to 10% market share loss to competitors like Taco Bell and Qdoba was the competitive lesson. The company's recovery, led by Brian Niccol, was the application of this lesson. The $100 million a year R&D budget for food safety was not a marketing expense. It was a new, permanent cost of doing business. The company was forced to pivot. It had to find a way to keep the marketing of food with integrity while abandoning the operational risk it created. This led to the implementation of blockchain-based traceability and the centralization of high-risk food prep into sterile, off-site commissaries. The lesson was clear. A brand must balance its marketing promise with its operational controls. The company learned that it could not grow fast and be decentralized and fresh at the same time. Growth at that scale requires a centralization and control. The 2015 crisis was the price the company paid for scaling its marketing faster than its operations. This leads to the second core lesson, the critical importance of leadership and innovation. The 2015 crisis was an operational failure, but it was caused by a leadership failure. Steve Ells, the founder, was a chef and a visionary. He was not an operator. His refusal to innovate the menu and his resistance to operational changes had made the brand stagnant and inefficient. The board's decision to oust Ells in 2017 and replace him with Brian Niccol from Taco Bell was the articulation of this lesson. It was a recognition that a 2,000-store, $4.5 billion a year company needed an operator, not a visionary. The lesson was that a founder's vision can, and often does, become a liability when a company reaches scale. Niccol's arrival was a pivot from philosophy to efficiency. His immediate implementation of a digital ordering system in the Chipotlane was a direct solution to the 20% productivity drop caused by the old manual model. The digital pivot, which now accounts for 40% of all sales, was the most important innovation in the company's history. It proved that efficiency and integrity could coexist. The digital make line allowed the company to increase its throughput by 30% without compromising the customizable fresh food model. The lesson was that innovation is not just about food, it is about process. The company's 40 million user loyalty program is the new Food with Integrity. It is a new way to build a direct, trust-based relationship with consumers, a relationship that is now built on data and convenience rather than just local farm sourcing. This new data-driven and operationally sound model built by Brian Niccol allowed the brand to finally execute a safe diversification into cultural marketing. The company had learned from the 2015 crisis that its food with integrity message was a massive risk when it was tied to its actual physical food. The new strategy, therefore, was to find a new, safer way to communicate this same message. This is the core lesson of the company's diversification into gaming and sustainable fashion. These pivots were not just about chasing Gen Z, they were a sophisticated risk management strategy. The gaming pivot, with its $20 million per campaign cost, was a way to generate hype and 1 billion plus viral views. It was a short-term sales driver that, as the data indicates, was highly effective at capturing the 30% Gen Z engagement it needed for future growth. This was the sizzle. The sustainable fashion pivot, however, was the stake. This was the true, modern food with integrity. By launching the avocado-dyed line, Chipotle was creating a physical, tangible product that perfectly communicated its sustainability message. This $50 million per year ancillary business, which was built on the waste of 300 million avocado pits, was a brilliant marketing pivot. It was a brand story that was completely insulated from the risks of E. coli or Norovirus. It was a safe way to be virtuous. This is the lesson. The company successfully transferred its integrity message from its high-risk food product to a low-risk fashion product, resulting in a 20% increase in positive brand perception. This dual-pronged diversification, gaming for hype, fashion for integrity, was the final lesson. It proved that the brand could successfully engage the Gen Z market and rebuild its core message, all while being underpinned by a new, operationally sound, and digitally native business model. Ultimately, the history of Chipotle is a story of a single brilliant idea, food with integrity, that was almost destroyed by its own operational success. The 2015 to 2017 crisis was the necessary fire that forced the company to evolve. It had to sacrifice its founder-led chef mentality to survive. The lesson was that a vision is worthless without a system to safely and efficiently execute it. The new Chipotle is a hybrid. It retains the marketing language of its food with integrity past, but it runs on the data-driven, centralized, and operations-first model of a true fast food giant. This resilient, efficient, and culturally relevant new model is what ensures its 10 to 15% annual growth and its continued dominance.